Hello and welcome to the Red Zone Tight End Analysis Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42, and of course you know Josh Shepardson at Beachhead50. And of course you wrote up this great piece here, and we've got plenty of tight end options for you this week. And I'm not going to call this the year of the tight end, but there's been plenty of surprise tight ends. There's been plenty of great performances. And this first guy here, this is, it's a narrative game, of course, and we all know about Rob Gronkowski. But in all reality, when you factor in price tag, outside of that first game, really hasn't exceeded salary very often at all. So really with him, you're obviously paying for that great high floor, which you probably wish that you had last week. He had a down game by his standards, but most tight ends last week were awful and killed cash game lineups, including my own. So Rob Gronkowski, though, against the Colts, who are not a good team defensively particularly, and this is your whole narrative straight games, overinflated, underinflated, none of that matters. Highest team total for the Patriots. You might as well target their best player when they have the highest team total.
Yeah, and I love the Brady Gronk stack this week. I don't mind running it out there in cash games and filling in with some value pieces around them. He's far and away the best player at the position, which is always nice to get a guy like that in your cash game lineups. Also, incredibly high ceiling in GPPs. Love his price point at DraftKings still. If you compare it to receivers, just using a one-to-one comparison, he's underpriced. If he were priced like that at receiver, you'd use him. And he's so far and away better than the other tight end options. It just makes sense to pony up for him. But even on FanDuel, you can budget around him. There are some bargain plays. So love him in this matchup. Love the high total. The high total is going to raise his floor, raise his ceiling. There's nothing that you can't like about Gronk here, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the comparison still of talking about his price relative to other positions, because that's where you really realize that he truly is actually a value. Next up, Tyler Eifert, a guy had another big game last week in seemingly a tough matchups, but also we see that the Seahawks have been really exploited by tight ends this season as well. But now facing off against a Buffalo team that you got to imagine the Bengals are going to be airing the ball out here. This is a tough front seven. They're tough to run against. And, Jeremy Hill hasn't had much success on the ground. Gio Bernard has looked good. But at the same time, it seems like the way to attack this Buffalo team is through the air. And it's not like Andy Dalton. This isn't 2014 Andy Dalton where you're afraid when he puts the ball in the air. You want him to put the ball in the air from a DFS standpoint. And, he's certainly building a really nice rapport with Tyler Eifert this year.
Definitely, and I didn't note it in the write-up, but it is worth mentioning that Aaron Williams is on IR, so the Bills are down a safety. You would figure a guy like Williams would have some hand in coverage with Eifert if he were healthy, so kicking into that depth already is not going to be beneficial for the Bills against a talented tight end like Eifert. Big target in the red zone, but as I noted in the write-up, this isn't Kyle Rudolph. This isn't touchdown or bust. He's putting up yardage. He's putting up receptions. And with a new Andy Dalton, that's willing to use all of his weapons and not just have tunnel vision for A.J. Green, Eifert's really stepped up. And outside of the one game where he posted a 0, he's been a stud at the position all year. Yeah,
he's been great and had a couple 2-touchdown games already. So, the upside's there. The floor is nice. The one game where he was ended up getting shut out, he still caught a pass at the end zone, thought it was a touchdown, ruled not a touchdown. So I'm still a believer that his floor, is higher than what that game indicates. Next up, Antonio Gates wasted no time solidifying his Hall of Fame case there. Fresh back from suspension, caught a touchdown on the 5th or 6th play from scrimmage. 3 catches on the first drive. Didn't do much then until late. Got another touchdown pass. 9 for 92 and 2 touchdowns. We know Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates have great rapport. They've been doing this for a very long time. And, yes, Keenan Allen's still a guy who's going to see a lot of targets, but, this is the most reliable target on this offense, and that's not going to change by an emergence of Keenan Allen.
No, and I listed him with the value plays. I could have listed him with the elite plays because he certainly belongs up there, but his price hasn't caught up to what he's capable of. His FanDuel salary of $5,500 is cheap relative to his peers, and even $4,600 is not bad. And this is a case where at $4,600, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it makes sense to roster both Gronk and Gates and slot one into the flex. Gates is underpriced for what his floor and ceiling are, and this is a pass-happy Chargers offense that is airing it out a lot more than they're running the ball, and game flow is going to dictate that they throw it a lot this week, at least according to odds makers. They're double-digit underdogs. They're going to be playing catch-up. grab their top pass-catching target on at least some of your rosters, because Gates is the number one pass-catching target for Rivers. They reestablished that immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly no question there. Definitely one of the more solidified roles of any tight end in the league. And Larry Donnell, next up for the Giants. As we saw last week, Eli Manning has no problems with spreading the ball around, getting it to everyone. And Larry Donnell is actually the one that made the late touchdown catch to win the game. And in Odell Beckham style, even falling backwards, getting both feet down. It was an impressive catch. So we've seen Larry Donnell have big games before. We've seen him be a reliable target for Eli Manning. And maybe doesn't have quite the floor of these other guys, but he certainly has a nice ceiling, especially when you see Odell Beckham hasn't practiced. Ruben Randle expected to miss the game. He should see a ton more volume and more targets this week, if for just that reason.
Yeah, and surprisingly, he's already second on the team in targets with 30 this season. Not the type of freakish athlete that's going to go out and rattle off 100 yards receiving, but he's a guy that can catch a handful of passes, and once they get in the red zone, he's a huge target. And Eli's willing to throw him the football around the end zone. And anytime you've got a guy that's big that can catch touchdown passes like that at just $2,900 on DraftKings, that's a great punt. At $5,300 on FanDuel, you certainly have some other options. I mean, you only have to pay $200 more to get Gates, so I'm not really in favor of using him on FanDuel for the most part, just because he is priced in such close proximity to Gates. But on DraftKings at $2,900, it's tough to argue with what you're getting at that cost and the potential for him this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I like your first opening sentence here for the Travis Kelce write-up. Week 1 for life after Jamal Charles, and obviously that means more targets for the rest of the players in the offense, especially in the short passing game for Captain Checkdown, Alex Smith there. And, he just does not throw the ball down the field, but he hasn't been able to throw the ball down the field really because he hasn't had much protection from his offensive line, who've been absolutely terrible this year. So that actually bodes pretty well for a guy like Kelce because, he can catch those short passes and turn them into something big. Measurable-wise, he's similar to Gronkowski, not quite talent-wise, but, he's a huge target that can make big plays, and you got to imagine that Minnesota's going to get pressure on the quarterback this week.
Yeah, Kelce's been a big yards after catch guy in both seasons that he's been healthy in the NFL. Last year he did it, and this year he's following it up with another healthy yak showing. And there definitely are some concerns that Smith won't be able to stay upright and the offense will just be stagnant, which really is the reason that Kelce's a GPP-only play. But there's also upside. When you eliminate such a key piece from that offense like Charles, that production's got to get spread around somewhere, and that means Travis Kelce and Jeremy Maclin are going to be used in an increased role, most likely. The biggest concern I have is that they may keep Kelce in a little bit to block more if they load the box up, but I still don't see that being the case. Kelce's a receiving tight end and one of your few remaining healthy threats on offense. So I do like Kelce's ceiling, but the floor is lower than it was in weeks past when they had Jamal Charles to keep defenses honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely going to be interesting to see how that offense is spread around as we move forward. Next up, Gary Barnidge, and you look at this one on the surface, I guess, against a Denver team that's been phenomenal, probably the best defensive unit in football, at least from my vantage point. But you see Gary Barnidge has 20 receptions over the last 3 weeks, is the most of any tight end in all of football. We see the fact that, as you pointed out, Football Outsiders has Denver elite everywhere except for against the tight end where they rank 25th. And you got to imagine this is a terrible rushing offense for the Browns. Not going to probably have much success at all on the ground. So you got to imagine Josh McCown's going to be throwing the ball. You're not going to be targeting these wide receivers because they're all going to have really tough individual matchups, and they're just not that good. So Gary Barnidge just makes sense because even if this team gets crushed and loses by 4 touchdowns, Barnidge is probably going to see 10 targets or so.
Yeah, he's been targeted 10 times or more, or 10 times in 2 of the last 3 games. He's bested 100 yards in both of the contests that he got 10 targets. And he's got a touchdown in 3 straight, and this is a surprising breakout this year. But as you noted, the individual matchups for the receivers are nightmarish. Aqib Talib and Chris Harris Jr. are 2 of the best corners in the league. The same cannot be said about the receivers that they will be covering. Travis Benjamin's been good, but I mean, we're not talking about an elite receiver that either of these corners should have problems taking away from Josh McCown. And as you noted, the running's going to be tough sledding. The Denver front seven are very stout. They've been not very giving to opposing running backs, and neither Isaiah Crowell or Duke Johnson Jr. are the type of back that are likely to change their stout nature and make them look porous. So that process of elimination says Gary Barnidge should be the guy. I mean, even if the Browns are held in check, somebody's going to post some sort of maybe semi-meaningful offense. Barnidge is my guess for that based on the rapport that he has with McCown and the fact that it is the softest part of that Denver defense. And whether that's by design and they're giving tight ends looks because they could take everything else away or not, just looking at the numbers, it does look like that's definitely the best place to attack them.
Yeah, it definitely seems like they're just trying to keep everything in front of them, and they've done a hell of a job so far. There's been nothing over the heads of any of the secondary. Next up, Jordan Cameron for the Miami Dolphins. You got a tight end taking over as the interim coach in Miami, as you pointed out here. And this is a Miami defense offense. The defense is another story. The offense here that hasn't been particularly consistent, but now they're facing off against a Tennessee team that prior to holding Charles Clay to one catch for 7 yards last week was the worst team in football against tight end, according to Football Outsiders. Now after that shutdown performance, if you can call it that, they're still the worst team. So that tells you right there, this is a team that cannot defend the tight end. And you got to like the prospects here for Jordan Cameron at really, really low ownership this week.
Yeah, and I mean, Cameron's coming off of 2 games before the bye where he failed to reach the 20-yard threshold, so that should suppress his ownership. But he's targeted 17 times in those 2 games, so it's not for lack of effort to get him the ball. Tannehill just wasn't accurate with it, and Cameron's been utilized heavily in the passing game, even if the results haven't been there. He did have 2 good games to start the season, and he did flash what he's capable of at times with the Browns. So I do like his upside, and I love the matchup. Really, this is a matchup-based play, but it's not just a matchup-based play. Cameron has talent as well, and I'll take talent coming out of a bye week in preparation against a defense that if the new coach of the Dolphins did his homework, recognizes you attack this Titans team with your tight ends because they cannot be stopped.
Yeah, and another great thing about that is recency bias could even help him a little bit as well, because people who played Charles Clay last week see, well, maybe the Titans really are good against the tight end. That wasn't a product of good defense. That was a product of bad offense. So certainly something that I will be going back to here in some tournaments. Julius Thomas, the final one, an ex-Peyton Manning weapon here, and guy who he had limited snap count last week, so certainly don't go looking at the box score and think, oh, well, Julius Thomas wasn't good last week. Why would I play him this week? He's got a matchup against a Houston team that is in the bottom third of the league against tight ends. And, this is a team that, they haven't got to the quarterback. I think they only have 6 sacks on the season. They just, for some reason, even with elite players on the defensive line, now it looks like Jadeveon Clowney going to miss this game. So now all of a sudden you got Blake Bortles, assuming that he's healthy, coming off the best game of his career, adding another weapon. Maybe not quite full-time snap count, but much more than last week. And all these things point towards a nice game for Julius Thomas.
Yeah, and reports are positive about Bortles playing this weekend. Obviously, if he doesn't play, you have to knock Thomas's stock down as you would with the receivers and anybody else catching passes from Chad Henne or attempting to catch passes from Chad Henne anyway. But Blake Bortles, as long as he's playing, for all his faults, one of his faults is certainly not getting the ball downfield. He's not one of these timid young quarterbacks who just checks it down. He airs it out, and with an athletic tight end that can go up the seam and stretch the field like Thomas, having a quarterback that's willing to take shots down the field as he's done with Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson certainly helps Julius Thomas's cause. And we know once you get around the goal line, yes, part of it was obviously a product of playing with Peyton Manning. This guy knows how to work in the red zone. He's caught 12 touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. And, that type of red zone production certainly is eye-catching, no matter who he's catching passes from.
Yeah, really the only thing not going well for him in that offense is the fact that his name's not Allen. But outside of that, he should be a nice target for Blake Bortles. All right, that's going to wrap things up here for the tight end analysis. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Got lots of great content for everything else at dailyfantasycafe.com.